We're discussing the playoff X factors for the Buffalo Bills and answering your biggest questions about Bills Ravens today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, folks. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our discussion. Lots of good things to get into today. Some of your biggest questions about Bills Ravens and some playoff X factors. A lot to discuss. Very excited about it. You may have noticed I'm battling some soreness in my throat. I feel great. I think it's just related to the big temperature changes that we've had here in North Carolina. It's been very, very cold. It went from pretty warm to pretty cold. And whenever that happens, my allergies tend to flare up in my throat in particular. And so we're going to battle through it. And I'm just going to try to reserve myself a little bit. You notice, right, that I have a little bit of reservation in really projecting my voice. So we'll try to give myself the best chance to get through this podcast and the other three that I have to record today. All right, let's get into it. First one comes from John, who says, new twist with the Curtis Samuel motion. Feels like we are setting up some playbook tricks, reference material for the Ravens to study. And so I think it's an interesting thing to get into. Curtis Samuel obviously had a good game. He led the Bills in receiving against the Denver Broncos, had a good game against the New England Patriots as well. And Samuel's an interesting layer to this offense. You know, it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to make more of an impact throughout the course of the season as he just had a lot of injuries. But perhaps the silver lining with that entire situation is that it's a new layer to this Bills offense in the postseason. And there's some unscouted looks and some guesswork on behalf of the opposition to kind of figure out what the Bills are going to do with this guy. But if you go back to training camp, I spent a little over a week with the Bills during training camp, and you could tell based on the installation that they had a lot in mind for Curtis Samuel and what he can mean for this offense. And so injuries have really taken away from his first year in Buffalo, but maybe there's, like I said, that silver lining late in the year that he can come through and provide an X factor for this offense, and maybe not a high volume type player, but another wrinkle, another layer to what the Bills like to do. Harry says, after watching your All-22 review, is it time to give Dawson Knox some flowers? You've always been a champion for Knox. I know people hate the contract. They still complain about drops from 3 years ago. The reality is that he's a very valuable player to this operation. It was great on Sunday. He's a team leader and a glue guy for Josh. Give me Dawson Knox on the biggest of stages Sunday at 6:30 against the Ravens. Look, Knox is a useful player for this team. He's a big part of the run game as a play side blocker. He's a huge part of the overall versatility of the offensive personnel and the different packages that they want to get into. Obviously, a big part of the locker room and the culture of this football team. But the way that I think a lot of people are looking at Dawson Knox is that it's a $10 million a year tight end, and he caught 22 passes this year. That's what people are going to focus in on. He's a 13th highest paid tight end in the NFL by APY. But look, if your name isn't Josh Allen or James Cook, no offensive skill player had an overly impressive statistical season for the Bills. Everybody eats. And that's a big part of what makes this Bills offense tough to defend. So there's a lot of nuance to the conversation. I certainly understand if your gripes with Knox is more rooted in the contract, but at least it's salvageable. At least it's not an injured player. At least it's not a guy that's completely underperforming. He's just making an impact in ways that are hard for people to measure, right? People look at receiving production. well, you're going to be underwhelmed. But if you factor in the entire package, I think it's a lot more digestible, even if he's still overpaid relative to the rest of the league. It's not like he's not a valuable member to this team. Paul says, I think the Bills need to play a 4-3 against the Ravens with Milano, Bernard, Williams all on the field. However, I want them to play a one-high safety look with Taylor Rapp, take Hamlin off the field, and keep Taron Johnson on the field as a third corner, hybrid, box safety, fourth linebacker, etc. Now, you've talked about this, but this is the best 11 on the field to defend the Ravens. Also need one or two of those linebackers to be shooting gaps on every play. They can't sit back and wait for Ravens linemen to engage them if they expect to have a fighter's chance to keep the wraps on Henry. All right, well, you will see three linebacker stuff. You did last time when the Bills played the Ravens. 28% of the snaps, the Bills were on three linebackers. They will use it against certain personnel groupings. And look, the three linebackers on the field against the Ravens the first time around were Balin Spector, Dorian Williams, and Nicholas Moreau. That right there should give you some optimism about what this matchup can look like, because it's going to be Bernard, Milano, and Williams as opposed to Spector, Williams, and Moreau. So you will see three linebackers situationally. I don't know that it's going to be more than 25 to 35%. Your idea of going three linebackers and having a low safety, I'd be surprised, especially the idea of keeping Taron Johnson on the field. I love having Taron on the field, but I don't think you want him to play from depth. He's never really played there. He's never been a high post player. And look, Hamlin and Rapp have been good tacklers. They've been good run support players. So I think that's what you live with, is you got to pull Taron off the field for Dorian Williams against certain personnel groupings in certain situations of the game. So I think it's good to have some wrinkles for this game, just like you saw against Denver. They had the odd mirror look. I talked all about that in the All-22 review. So you want some wrinkles, and look, three linebacker stuff. Maybe you want to get creative with personnel groupings, but one thing you cannot do, you can't reinvent the way you play defense. Like, you have a scheme, you have a philosophy, and you need to be the best version of that. Certainly adjust, certainly make wrinkles, but you cannot just come up with an entirely new defense that you've never played before for one game. That's worse. So you got to make some choices. You have to be game plan specific, but this idea that the Bills are going to suddenly be a defense that they've never been is kind of crazy in a high leverage moment like this. All right, coming up next, more conversation on playing against Baltimore, including what to do about that zone read. We'll talk about that next. Be sure to stick with me. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to pick up a win. I love betting on which players will hit the over on stat projections, if a team will cover the spread. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Look, you can get in on this Bills-Ravens game. Right now, they have the Bills as home underdogs, 1.5-point underdogs. So maybe you like the Bills with points at home. That seems like not a bad idea. Also, the over-under for this game is set right now at 51.5. If you like that, head on over to FanDuel.com. Join today. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, the next one today comes from Cole, who says, how do the Bills slow down the quarterback option with Lamar and Henry in the backfield? I watched the Ravens run it on the Steelers over and over again. Seemed like the Steelers were biting hard. All right, let's talk about this. And obviously, you're talking about zone read, which is a play where the quarterback either hands it to the back or they keep it and run it. And what that quarterback is reading is the defensive end. If the defensive end crashes down, the quarterback keeps it. If the defensive end stays home, the quarterback gives it to the running back. The Steelers chose to take away Henry and have that defensive end crash down on Henry and live with Jackson's production. But where they really failed was their second level didn't do a good enough job of maintaining their leverage with blocks, and it created a lot of space for Lamar Jackson to just be an athlete, not run people. So I think it's a decent idea to say, hey, we'd like to take away Henry and live with the running production of Lamar Jackson. But the second level has to be better playing over top of their blocks so that you're not getting gashed by Jackson. So it's hard to take it all away. Nobody takes it all away. I think that's one thing I hope everyone appreciates as I try to answer these questions about the Ravens and what the Bills need to do. Nobody's been able to figure this out, right? They're killing everybody with their ground game and how they're able to move the ball. Guys are wide open all the time. Teams are getting gashed on the run. These are not specific issues that the Bills have. This is a 31-team issue, and I have ideas, but I don't have all the answers. I can just give you the best ideas, and it's going to come down to one-on-one matchups, maintaining leverage, and making plays. You know, if the Bills can do that, they'll have a chance. If not, they're going to give up a lot of production. James says, after the game Sunday, McDermott said that the play of the lines will determine how far they will go in the playoffs. What does your confidence meter look like for this O-line and D-line heading into this game against the Ravens? Well, I think that's true for every game in the history of football. It comes down to the trenches. Can you win the line of scrimmage? And I think that's at an even higher level in the postseason. And the Ravens are good in the trenches. There's no doubt. I am concerned about the Bills and how they match up with the O-line, D-line matchup. I think if I were to rank the units in this game in terms of the O-lines and the D-lines, I think the best unit is the Bills' offensive line. Second best unit is the Ravens' defensive line. The third best unit is the Ravens' offensive line, and the fourth best unit is the Bills' defensive line. So you kind of have decent matchups in terms of where you're strong versus where they're strong, and where you're a little bit weaker versus where they're a little bit weaker. But the real challenge is the combination of the trench talent that they have with what's around it, right? They got good skill players. They got good back seven players. Who shows up that day? Who can win battles? Who can make plays? I do think that the Bills are in decent shape when it comes to O-line versus D-line. But I think there's a bit of a concern when it comes to Ravens O-line versus the Bills defensive line. Baked into that is Henry and Jackson and Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman. Good Deal says, why has the D-line in the past failed in the postseason? And so far from what you saw against Denver, could this D-line be different? Well, the Bills have been eliminated 4 times in a row in the divisional round. Well, I guess 3 in the divisional round, once in the AFC Championship game. 3 times to Mahomes, once to Burrow. They had 2 sacks in those games. They have no turnover-worthy throws forced to those quarterbacks. The defensive line has not been good enough. So why has it failed in the postseason? I'm not sure that it's failed. I think it's just an average collection of talent. And we're disappointed because we want more out of it. We want more out of a collection of players that aren't really capable of making a greater impact. I think that's kind of at its core is just an average collection of players and expecting them to come through and be impactful and dominant in high leverage moments. So that's where I'm at. I mean, you can't watch the same thing over and over again and try to convince yourself that you have better players than you do, because I don't think they have it. I think they have okay players. I like Rousseau. I think he's a really good starter. I think Oliver's capable. Daquan Jones has been average. Epinesa is average. Smoot's okay as a rotational depth player. I mean, Phillips is a replacement level guy. Austin Johnson's been a replacement level guy. What do you expect? What do you expect out of these guys? I think that's what it comes down to, is you just have average players and you're expecting them to be great. And so hopefully collectively they can be great, but they don't have those dominant pieces that can take over games. And so that's why I think we continue to be disappointed. I'm not convinced that this is a better group than the last 4 years. If I do have optimism from the Denver game, it's that they handled double teams well. They went one-on-one against these drive blocks extremely well. But Denver's run scheme is super vanilla, and Baltimore's the exact opposite, right? They have a lot more creative run schemes and a lot better players. So it's a big challenge, and we'll see if the Bills can meet the moment. If their defensive line can't, then it's going to be another bounce in the divisional round. Koala Bear Khan has this one. Koala Bear Khan's an awesome member of our Herd Mentality Discord channel. So would love for you to be part of that. Check out the link in today's show notes for the Substack or the subtext. Either one gets you into the Discord. Koala Bear Khan says, how can the Bills increase their success of slowing down Baltimore's zone run schemes? Perhaps maybe you could break down if there's similarities or differences between how the Bills do their zone runs and what kind of gap integrity goes into it. Well, I think generally speaking, I mean, it's about leveraging your gap and straining hard for it. Zone runs, they're trying to move you horizontally and create creases. How do you fight pressure with pressure? Leverage your gap. And when you have the opportunity to get off a block and make a play. That's what it's going to come down to. Can guys individually do that? And if you can, you'll have a chance. If you're going to get blown off the ball and moved out of the way and creases are going to be created and you can't fill, they're going to be running all over you. So leverage your gap, get off blocks, make tackles. I think what's similar about the Bills and the Ravens in their approach to the zone run scheme is that both teams use big people to do big people things. I talk about the Bills and Alec Anderson and Dawson Knox and Mac Hollins or Reggie Gilliam. Those guys on the edges winning blocks. Baltimore does that too. They got Patrick Ricard, who's like a 300-pound fullback, Mark Andrews, Charlie Kolar. Yeah, they have a similar situation. So they understand the value of having big people do big people things. They got a big offensive line too. A lot of size left to right. So I think that's where it's similar. The Bills probably do a little bit more cutback, and I think that speaks to the differences in running back talent, and the skill sets that James Cook has versus Derrick Henry, where Derrick Henry can just be a lot more straight ahead, and plow through people, where James is more of a slasher and uses his vision and works off his blocks a little bit differently than Derrick Henry does. But I think the reality here is Baltimore's great with their zone rush. They're number 2 in the NFL in success rate on zone runs at 57%. They're number 1 in yards per carry on zone runs, 6.03 yards. So they're number 1 at 6.03. The Lions are number 2 at 5.41. The Packers are number 3 at 4.89. That's crazy, right? Like a very commanding lead in yards per carry on zone runs. The Bills' success rate on zone runs is 54.3%, which is number 5, so not far behind. They're both really good zone rushing offenses. They do it a little bit different, but they both really buy into big people doing big people things on the line of scrimmage to win blocks and create those creases. All right, we're talking more Bills-Ravens on the other side of it, and a little question about Joe Brady. A lot to get into, folks. Be sure to stick with me. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data you won't find anywhere else. From unique insights and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. I know from experience how important it is to make hiring decisions. Having access to insights like what candidates' skills they have, or how they're connected to your network helps you feel confident when pulling the trigger. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, we got some more to get into today. The next one comes from Bills WZA, who says, I know you will be knee-deep in covering Bills Ravens, but preliminarily, I feel that the biggest factor going into this game is the game plan. That may seem obvious, but in my mind, if the Bills win after the game, we won't be saying it was because of Josh Allen putting the cape on. We will be saying it was because the coaches had an ingenious game plan. Do you agree? I think I agree to an extent. I mean, it's really going to come down to who shows up that day. The Ravens' A game is probably better than any other teams in the NFL. But they don't always show up with it. That's how they have losses to the Browns and the Raiders and the Steelers. They have a lot of procedural errors on offense. I think it's very helpful that this game is in Buffalo. I think it's going to matter a ton. And game plans are going to matter. Which team doesn't make crushing mistakes is going to matter. I think it's hard to admit it, but games are lost more than they are won. Who doesn't make the crushing mistakes? And I do think that the Bills coaching staff has shined in its biggest moments. Going back to those wins over Kansas City and Detroit, I thought those were both great game plans on both sides of the ball. with Josh Allen still doing Josh Allen things. I think it's going to take all of that. Have the right plan, execute, and then Josh Allen has to be special, right? That's a big part of this equation. And I think there's a lot of factors that are different this time around, starting with it being at home, starting with it being later in the season, where the Bills were still early in installing their installing their offense, and it certainly has taken off defensively. The Bills had no Matt Milano, no Terrell Bernard, no Taron Johnson. Taylor Rapp was concussed after 16 plays, and Cole Bishop played 41 snaps. Dwayne Carter played like 26 snaps. And Nicholas Moreau played 28% of the snaps. Like, none of that's going to be true. You're going to have better players on the field. You're going to be at home, and you're a more seasoned team. Now, Baltimore's also a more seasoned team, right? They've worked through some of their issues early in the season. They started 0-2, right? They've stacked a bunch of wins. Obviously, their offense has really come alive, and their defense has certainly grown a ton from where it was earlier in the year, too. So there's a lot of evolution for both teams as you look at this matchup. And I think it's why it's going to come down to who shows up that day, who doesn't make mistakes, and who can win their one-on-one matchups better. I think that's going to decide this game. Justin says on the post-game review pod, you mentioned it wasn't a good matchup for Cooper or Coleman. Are there any other teams remaining in the playoffs that pose similar challenges? This season, Josh has taken what the defense has given him and not taken chances like in the past, which led to turnovers. I think Cook has played a huge role in that, along with the offensive line. I know you said never give a second contract to a running back, but has Cook's play this year changed your mind? Finally, do you think the Ravens will try and stop Cook and make the passing game beat them? All right, let's it's kind of three questions here. In my defense, first of all, I said several times in the build-up to the Broncos game that it wasn't a good matchup for Cooper or Coleman. Yeah, I that was not a surprise to me. I think Baltimore's a decent matchup. I think Kansas City's a decent matchup. Houston is not a good matchup. So if you're thinking where the production would be for them in these future games, the worst matchup is Houston. I think Baltimore and Kansas City are okay. Those are the remaining games in the AFC side of things, at least. And I think that's okay. Right? I think that's the whole point of how this Bills offense is constructed. Even if it's not a good matchup for Coleman and Cooper, it still forces the defense into these man coverage looks, these one high safety looks, and the Bills are able to tap into other things to be productive. And when those matchups are there for Cooper and Coleman, they can go after them. But if not, it still opens up a lot for where you're best, right? With your tight ends, with your slot players, and your running backs. So even when they're not productive, it still helps the Bills get the defensive looks that they want to optimize what they can do offensively. On the Cook contract extension idea, there's a lot of nuance baked into that. I think that's going to be an entire offseason podcast that I'm not going to flesh out right now. I'll say this. I think there are important acknowledgments on both sides of that conversation, James Cook's side and the team side, to make it make sense. Cook's obviously been a very important playmaker for this team. He's been very productive. He matters. But he's also not a third down back. He's not a closer. There's that element to it. He's a big part of it, but he's not Saquon Barkley or, that type of player where, those guys play 80% of the snaps. Like, James Cook plays less than half the snaps offensively. That has to be baked into this conversation. And Cook has to acknowledge that too. So I think I'm more open to it than I have been, but this can't be a market reset contract. It can't be. So again, an entire offseason podcast will be dedicated to that. And then your question was about if the Ravens will try to stop James Cook and make the passing game beat them. I think the Ravens have the best run defense in the league. They have absolute tanks up front. I don't think they have to go into any game thinking that they need to do anything special to stop the run. It's okay, what do they do? How do we line up and go play? They got those types of guys on their front where there's no special formula. They can just play their regular defense and defend the run because that's how they've built their defense to be constructed. Justin says, if we lose Joe Brady this year to a head coaching opportunity, who do you see coming in, and do you think the offense will take a step back? Does Coach Cromer have any footing in taking over as OC? I hate to see Brady go, but would really hate to see Cromer ever leave one Bills drive. So as for this idea, I did an episode on that, I think last week, where I really got into this. But I think generally speaking, Joe Brady has optimized this offense. But I also think that Josh Allen sets a certain floor for the offense that is still quite good, no matter who's calling the plays and who's the offensive coordinator. I think it'd be a highly attractive opening should it come free. I think your leading candidates would be quarterbacks coach Ronald Curry, Davis Webb from the Denver Broncos, maybe Doug Peterson because of the relationship that he has with Sean McDermott. But obviously, vibing with Josh Allen is going to be the most important piece of that equation. And I'll be curious to see where the search goes. As far as Aaron Cromer being the offensive coordinator, I'm not sure if that's a path that he wants, or if the Bills look at him as that. He's certainly done it in the past. I don't know if that would be the direction, but my suspicion though is that the Bills are the last stop in Aaron Cromer's coaching career. So I don't think he's going to go somewhere else. It's just a matter of, does he stay and continue as the O-line coach, or is there an offensive coordinator conversation to be had there? But we'll see how it all plays out. Maybe it'll just be Joe Brady again next year, but man, there's so many openings, it feels like. And I certainly understand him being an attractive candidate. We'll see what happens. All right, folks, that's it for today. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Crossover Thursday next, then my full primer on Ravens, Bills, and then, of course, Saturday, final thoughts, injuries, and predictions. All right, folks, thanks for being here. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.